Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Snatch Chat podcast. So this is a Olympic lifting, weightlifting podcast, but rather than it be a podcast where we sort of look at the nerdy, elite level athletes and talk about what they're doing around the world, I want to bring it all the way back down, simplify weightlifting for the masses and make it cool again. So I don't know about you, but you listen to sort of like people talking about weightlifting, the names of these athletes, the things that they sort of talk about go straight over your head. And now for the most of us, all we want to try and do is lift more weight and do as much as we possibly can. And this is what it's all about. I want to try and simplify weightlifting as much as possible. So over this next sort of couple of episodes, what you're going to find that the questions that come up are asked from the guys that I coach. And you're probably going to relate a lot to these sort of questions. And that's going to be the main bulk of the podcast. But then we're going to have a few special guests come in as well. Now, we've got a few special guests coming up. They're going to be from competitions. So if you're watching my Instagram and my YouTube channel, what you'll find is that you'll have competitions throughout this sort of year. People sort of compete. And I'm then going to sort of sit down with them after a competition. And we're just going to sort of hash it out really, see what they think went well, what didn't go so well, what my opinion of that competition was, and where we sort of move forwards, okay? And I think competitions are really, really like beneficial. You don't need to be absolutely amazing to sort of compete. Now that's what I want to try and get across within this sort of like these podcast episodes, is that it's just a test to see where you are. Yes, okay, you can test yourself in training, but the issue with training is that you can have as many attempts as you want. You can rest as much as you possibly want between lifts. You don't get that on a competition platform. You might have 2 minutes because you're following yourself. You might only have 60 seconds. And it's really good to have that sort of mental aspect of the sport, just to really sort of test out your strength. So that is the general gist of this podcast. So I just want to sort of simplify weightlifting and make it cool again, okay? Weightlifting is really, really hard. So if I can just give you advice to simplify the movements and help you improve your performance, that is amazing, okay? But before we get into the first sort of questions, you might not know me at all. So my name's Connor. I have been a weightlifting coach now for the last 12 years, okay? I started weightlifting through CrossFit. Now, a lot of people say that I hate CrossFit, and that is not the case. I slate it a lot, but that's mainly because, or what I found from CrossFit, is that you end up trying to master all these different aspects of sports. You're looking to do gymnastics, you're looking to do your weightlifting, you're still looking to improve your strength, but then you've got your endurance, and then you've got all these different aspects. And I didn't like being a jack of all trades and a master of none. I really enjoyed the weightlifting side of things. I wanted to see how much weight I could throw above my head, okay? So I sort of came away from CrossFit into weightlifting as a sport in itself, with the sole goal to sort of snatch 100 kilos and clean and jerk 130. We achieved that. It then just sort of snowballed. I'm now sort of chasing bigger numbers and helping others achieve that as well. And I think the reason why people think I hate CrossFit is because when you're in a CrossFit gym, there's not many people that lift well, okay? Because the classes are big, there's multiple people training, you're not getting that direct feedback. But the other flip side is that it's all about trying to move the bar as fast as you possibly can or lift the biggest weights, okay? So we then end up losing the technicalities of that movement. How do I move the heaviest weight the most efficient way? The general consensus is you've got to throw it, you've got to try and pull it higher, and that's not the case. As soon as that bar reaches sort of our belly button in the snatch or a little bit higher in the clean, we hit that bottom position. And all these main foundations of the Olympic lifting movements gets thrown to the side, and it's all about trying to pull the bar to our shoulders. And that's when then they end up power snatching, power cleaning more than their full movements. And then they end up just plateauing. And that is my biggest issue, where if we were able to slow things down, you would find that, yes, progress is quite slow, but would improve your mobility, improve your strength, your technique would come. But then you'd constantly find thereafter that you can constantly improve. But people don't want to. That's the slowest approach. The fast approach is just by yanking it and trying to throw yourself under a heavy bar. And again, that's sort of like what I want to try and help people with. Because it is frustrating as a coach to watch, but it's also frustrating to know that you're not getting the full answer to why you're doing or why you have certain technical aspects or technical inefficiencies. Now, again, this podcast is all going to try and break down these inefficiencies, help you live better and understand the movement. Now, what I try and drill into all of my clients that I coach is that it's not about the program. The program helps. A good program definitely helps. But the biggest thing that's going to help you is improving your knowledge within that sport, improving your knowledge of what is expected and how you're going to achieve said thing. Okay? That is going to be the biggest thing that's going to take you from A to B. All right? The program doesn't necessarily matter as long as you're learning and developing and understanding why you're doing certain things in the program. All right. So with that being said, let's get into the first few questions. So the first question is, how do you work out when the technique is good enough to start adding weight? It's like acknowledging it's never going to be perfect, but also aiming for it to be perfect, and that's tricky. Now, this is it's a sort of a catch-22. We don't want to train bad reps, okay? We want to train good reps. Training good reps is only going to unlock the door to increase that weight. But we've also got to sort of find that tipping point. Now, if we're sort of talking about percentages here, 70 to 80%, okay, and we're doing sets of 3, just for argument's sake, we want to try and get towards 80% and still see good technique. So we might find 75%, that movement is absolutely perfect, pinpoint. I then go to 77%. So that's an extra couple of kilos on the bar, okay? And that movement now it's good for that first one. The second one was sort of like breaking down a little bit. That third rep wasn't so good. That shows us the area that we want to try and dig into, okay? And try and iron out what didn't go so well there. Have we now started to pull that bar overhead, okay? Is that down to fatigue hitting 77% for that amount of volume? Or is it because we've now brought back into that bad technical aspect of that movement? Now, all that means for me as a coach is that we need to still try and get a bigger foundation at 75% and knock on the door at 77%. What we don't want to do is see that we want to be working between 75 and 80%. We've now nailed 75%. We can do a few good reps at 77, but then we'll push it to 80% and then start to see it break down. Okay, so we need to try and push that tipping point to the point where like it's starting to rock. We can see things starting to break down and hold that for the next few weeks until you've ironed that out, and then you can go from 77 to 80%. Find that whether that's rocking around, it's on that tipping point, or if it's okay, we then unlock the next door to move on. So it's about trying to balance the tipping point. You're going to try and tip it, but you don't want it to then start to, fall into bad reps, okay? So it's about trying to sort of push that tipping point just a little bit more without it sort of rocking and starting to foul reps, all right? Question 2, what does realistic progression look like after you pass the beginner gain phase? Now, again, I think this is going to be different for everybody, okay? As a general rule of thumb, I would always say, actually, before I go into that, we've got to take into account training age. Now, for example, let's say your training age is 0 to 3 months. You're just getting into weightlifting, okay? You are going to find that your progression is quite big, okay? You'll go from just moving the bar to a 25 kilo snatch to a 40 kilo snatch and so on and so on. Now, you'll probably find that you'll get 5, maybe 10 kilos, maybe even up to 15 kilo progression year on year for that first 1 to 2 years. Okay, that is what I would sort of say is the beginner gains phase, that that newbie effect. Now, from that point there, you'll start to see that progression will slow down. It can't sort of make up these huge jumps. You can't go from 15 kilos to 40 kilos in 1 year and then find the year after you're going to then hit 80 kilos. It's going to start to tip down. And again, we can start to bring in your body weight into account and other things that you've sort of done. But the beginner gain phase is always going to be somewhere between 1 and 2 years. And then you'll start to find that progression won't be 1 to 2 kilos here and there. It will slow down ever so slightly. So it might well be that the first 2 years of your weightlifting, you added on 15, 20 kilos each year on year. Then you get to year 3. That progress is going to start to tail back. Okay, you might start to add 5 to 10 kilos to your lift. You're then now starting to push your overall strength. Your snatch now is, say 60% plus of your back squat. Your clean is now sort of 80% of your front squat. These are things now showing me that progress in your Olympic lifts is going to start to slow down. It's not necessarily a technique thing now. We've nailed the technique, but your strength is going to be not the limiting factor, but that's going to have an impact. So what we've got to try and do now in those next few years is layer up the strength. But as you get stronger, you've still got to try and iron out these creases. And you'll always find that it does a 360. Okay, you'll work on pulling power off the floor. You'll nail pulling power off the floor. But then you've got instability overhead. So then you'll work instability overhead. Now, from that instability overhead and the faster the pull from the floor, that hang position is weakened. You're now starting to pull the bar. You're not having good hip contact. You're slightly jumping forwards. Okay, I'm just, argument's sake. So then you start to work those areas. But now you've worked those areas and you've tightened the overhead position. The pulling power from the floor needs to be worked again because everything else now is getting pushed up to your max. So you'll find that you'll constantly do this circle, this 360 circle. If you do these few things, but then you sort of come back round again, and then you'll need to start to work on these areas. So at the start of your journey, everything's going to be mainly weightlifting technique, okay? We're trying to iron out the movement. We're trying to get the speed into that bottom position, trying to realize that the movement's a jump, not a pull overhead. Once that technique is embedded and it becomes more autonomous, it's now going to have more of a play on your strength going forwards. So we're going to have to improve our pulling power from the floor, our overhead strength, our lower body strength, which is then going to allow us to push our weightlifting technique up a little bit more. So it's going to start off really, really good. It's going to start to come down. But as long as we try and move these areas in segments and analysing what is actually going wrong in your movement, we should always be able to sort of progress. When you're sort of like, say, 3 to 5 years in the sport and you've followed this sort of principle, you'll find that then, you are sort of adding on 2 to 3 kilos. That progress is naturally going to start to slow down. But there's different things that you can do, whether that's sort of changing the way that you're training, adapting your training sessions. So rather than doing 3 sessions, you're now doing 4 sessions. So there are different things that you can sort of go into. But, as a general rule, progress is naturally going to come down. But we can do things to sort of keep progression moving forwards at a slower rate, but at a rate that it still increases. So what is the purpose of a top-down snatch? Now, if you don't know what a top-down snatch is, you get the bar, you stand all the way up, you then come all the way back down to the floor, and then you go all the way back up and execute the movement. Now, the reason why I use top-down snatches is that this gives the lifter more of a position, or more of an understanding of the positions that they need to flow through, okay? It is easier to learn weightlifting from a top-down approach than it is from the floor up, okay? So whenever you're learning the Olympic lifts, you're always going to, in my eyes, always going to learn to catch the bar or receive the bar. Then you're going to work from the high hang position. Then you're going to go to the hang, and then you'll go to the start. And that is only because you want to slightly increase the difficulty of that movement. Drop snatch, I'm just hitting an overhead squat. High hang snatch, I'm looking for that dip drive, receiving an overhead squat. I then go to my hang position. I bring that bar from my hang to my high hang before I execute the drop snatch. So you're trying to drill these movements. So the idea of a top-down snatch is that you get more exposure to the way that the bar wants to move. I stand up nice and tall. I can focus on weight through the center of my foot. How do I want to feel on the descent as I find my start position? And then can I replicate that on the way back up? Okay, so the normal thing that I'm sort of telling lifters to do when they're doing a top-down snatch is on the way down. So as you go down to the floor, you're going to find your high hang, you're going to paint the thighs, you're going to paint the shins, graze the floor. Can you execute the exact same movement? Can you still paint the shins, paint the thighs, feel the hips, jump and drop? All right, so it's giving you that exposure, that more time to practice the positions of that movement. It also allows you to get a strong braced start position, because you're not going to drop to the floor, reset. Okay, you're going to sort of keep that tension on the body. Well, that is the way that I sort of teach a top-down snatch. How do you overcome holiday breaks when trying to progress? I struggle with not doing anything, but also don't want to be dictated to about doing stuff when I am supposed to be resting/relaxing. Now, training on holiday is not for everybody. Some people enjoy that, some people don't. I'm one of those where if you want to, do it. If you don't. All you need to do with your training program, and again, this is not black and white. There is that sort of grey area, and I'll explain that in a second. But all you need to do with your program is program it so you know that you're going on holiday in 3 weeks' time. Okay, or whenever you would run a cycle up towards that. Okay, your holiday then would be potentially a deload week. All right, and that deload week is totally nothing. When you come back off that holiday, you then start 10% lighter and then start to bring it back up. So all you're looking to do is, say, for example, the few weeks up until your holiday, you were working up to about 85% doubles. Okay. 85% doubles, you've nailed 5 sets of 2 the week before you've gone on holiday. You've gone then on holiday. That holiday week is your deload week. The week after your holiday, all you're looking to try and do is work between 75 to 80%, okay? And then towards the end of the week, tinker with that 85%, okay? With the week after, looking to try and get as many reps in back under where you were at the previous week before you went on holiday, okay? And then that allows you to then forget about training, enjoy your holiday. Now, if you sort of like to move when you're on holiday, the holiday week, you just program a deload week, okay? That allows you then to have shorter sessions. You can go in and get something done. You don't have to be there for your full-length program. If you enjoy training whilst you're on holiday, keep your program the same. Nothing needs to change. Okay, so I think there's different ways that you can sort of look at that, and you've got to try and find out what works for you. Now, the person that I know that's asked this has booked a holiday quite close to a sort of a competition. So the way that we looked at doing this, or the way that I looked at doing this for this client, is reducing the session length down, getting the main movements done: snatches, clean and jerks, back squats, front squats, pulls off the floor, keeping the session short, taking all the accessory movements out, because I know that this person is going to be doing quite a lot of walking, being active whilst on holiday, and just maintaining sort of percentages. So we're not looking to sort of hit heavy doubles. If anything, I just want to try and get volume underneath this person's belt. And then as they come back off holiday, that's then when we can start to build those percentages up. So it's all about trying to work out what works for you and how you want that to look. Okay, because it's going to be different for everybody. So next question. Why does my brain run through all the cues and know what a lift is supposed to look, feel like, but my body does something completely different? Now, I think a lot of people will be able to understand where this question is sort of coming from. The biggest thing that I see from here is that you're telling yourself too much to do in that movement. Okay, this is how I want it to feel. This is how I want it to look. I need to remember this, this, and this, and this. And then all of a sudden, you've lost time. You've not been able to execute that movement. Okay, when you set up for a lift, okay, or before you've even set up for a lift, you're standing. You've got a couple of minutes before you go. Okay, before you go and hit that lift. That is when you're going to start to go over how you want it to look, how you want it to feel. Sort of getting the feel of that movement, imagining how you want that lift to be executed. When you go to the bar, you can't think about that. You've got to sort of think of a blank canvas and think of that one cue that really sort of hones in on the area that you need to try and really focus on. So, for example, is that drive to the midfoot? Is that jump? Is that bring the bar into the hips? Okay. Now, you will know what the biggest cue is if you find what your biggest area of development needs to be. Once you find out where your biggest area of development is, that's then when you can start to go, okay, this is the biggest focus point. The cue to get that biggest focus point is this. So, for example, I'm not hitting my hips. I'm not making good contact with my hips in the snatch. So all I'm thinking about doing in my snatch is I need to paint the thighs and drive that bar behind me. I'm trying to make good contact with my hips. So as I set up at the bar, so before I've set up at the bar, I'm standing there, I'm sort of visualizing, paint the thighs, feel the hips and extend. How do I want to feel it as I extend? I'm going to squeeze the glutes. I'm going to push off the midfoot. Okay, now I'm going to get ready. I'm going to move over to the bar. As I set up at the bar, what I'm trying to think here is thighs and hips, thighs and hips. Paint the thighs, drive into the hips. Paint the thighs, drive into the hips. And that is the only thing that I'm thinking about because it's the biggest issue that's going to prevent me from moving forwards. If you're coming up onto your toes a little bit too soon, so as that bar sort of passes the knees, you can already see that the heels are lifting. That's when you're going to go, okay, so here I'm just going to think about midfoot, midfoot. And I'm just going to constantly think about being on the midfoot until I feel the hips. As soon as I feel the hips, I hit the drop. Okay, so it's what I'm trying to basically say here, and I think I've just gone a real long-winded way of doing it, is what you need to try and do is analyze your movement, find out what your biggest thing that you need to work on, find the cue that fits the biggest issue that you're going to work on. Okay, and that is all that you're going to drill yourself. That's the only thing that you're going to drill when you are at the bar. Okay, 2 to 3 minutes between your sets, that is the time when you're going to start to visualize, imagine how you want it to look, how you want it to feel, and sort of go through that process. But as soon as you step to the bar, forget all of that, think about that one cue. All right, the biggest issue that people have with weightlifting is they're trying to fix multiple areas all at once. But when you're thinking about these multiple areas in a lift, you're then forgetting about the execution of that lift. And that's when it all starts to fall apart. So last question, how to manage setbacks, bad training days, stalled progress, etc. What are some good strategies to keep the focus on the long term and avoid the self-doubt creeping in? So, it's a good question that is, isn't it? How to manage setbacks, bad training days, and stalled progress. The biggest thing for me here is, and again, this is one of the things that I work with my clients is the check-in process, going through our weekly check-ins. Then we end up doing a monthly review, and then we assess the previous month and find that all these months have sort of stacked up, and then we get a general idea of sort of what's going on. So the biggest thing here is that we need to create a logbook of events. Okay. Now, what this logbook is going to show us is that we've got peaks and troughs. Good weeks when everything's performing on all firing on all cylinders. Weeks where it didn't go so well, bit shit, failed reps, etc., etc. And all we look to try and do within this curve, because training is always going to move like this, that the peaks are higher, the peaks are getting higher, and the lows are going up as well. Okay, so your movement, your training is very much like this. Okay, but the highs are higher and the lows are higher, so your progress is on this sort of curve. Now we can do that by logging things such as the weights lifted, 4 sets. Okay, what have you done for sets of 3 in the past? Is everything sort of moving up? Because we're going to get bad training days, we're going to get bad weeks, bad months. Okay, but it's trying to find the little gems within that. And then the other thing, so weight is always the biggest thing, and it's one of those where it starts to get a little bit frustrating because we hold ourselves to our weight because that's the biggest thing that the performance is on. But we also need to then look at the other aspect, which is movement quality. When you make a technical change, that movement is better, granted. Yeah, we're now moving better, but that doesn't always mean that that's going to have a positive impact on your strength. We don't have a positive impact in technique and then strength jumps. Okay, so when our technique improves, we then need to go through that learning process. So everything at the start is very cognitive. You'll do it once, you'll fail it 3 times. You'll do it again, and then you'll find that you can do it twice, 3 times, and then have a bunch of failures. And then we start to see that we're now hitting 50% good reps, 50% bad reps. And then the learning process carries on, and you'll get more good reps. Okay. Now, when you get those good reps, that learning process doesn't mean so. So for example, let's go start position. The hips are shooting. Okay, we're now getting to that process in training where the hips aren't shooting anymore, but which is brilliant. But now the thing is that you've now got to try and maintain that as you improve or increase the weight that is lifted on that bar. Now they both don't work together. The technique goes up, strength stays here. Technique is really good. We've now got to get the strength to sort of to level up with that, if that makes sense. I'm trying to think of another way to sort of explain what I'm trying to sort of talk about here. So when you make a technical change, you will go through that learning process. And as things become more autonomous, you're now hitting this the majority of the time. The percentage that you're lifting at is also going to start to increase. Now, what we've got to try and look at is whether we can maintain, or if we can maintain that technical change that we've tried to develop at those heavier weights. Brilliant. But you'll find that you'll get to a certain weight and that technical change will start to break back down. That is when we now need to create that bigger foundation of that technical change at that percent, so we then can get that strength to catch up with that technique, or the technique to catch up with the strength development that we are looking to sort of develop. All right. So the biggest thing here, and I don't necessarily think there's a right or wrong when it comes to how to manage setbacks, training days, store progress, but it's sort of looking back at your training, looking back at the weights lifted, not necessarily always for 1 rep maxes, but looking back at working sets, looking back at the movement quality, how you're lifting that bar. Are you lifting with a better technique? And then the other area that you can sort of look at as well is the sort of, so yeah, you got your maxes, okay, training volume, and then obviously your technique. And you can do that by videoing your movements as well, and then sort of looking back. So you want to try and create the biggest log of training volume, you keeping track of your 1 rep maxes, 3 rep maxes, 5 rep maxes, and then also videoing your movements, so then you can sort of go back and compare two movements from this time compared to this time last year, and sort of do it that way. I don't necessarily think there's a way or a strategy other than, or there is different things, but I think the biggest strategy here is to keep a logbook and always look back at those sort of previous weeks / months / years. All right. Hopefully that has answered these questions. Now, if you have any questions that you want to get answered on the podcast, you can do so by using the link below. Then you can put all your questions on there, and then they will get answered on the podcast in one of the episodes. So that is the end of episode 1. Hope you've enjoyed it. Make sure to give it a like, just so then we can get this out further to the weightlifting masses, get people enjoying weightlifting, get people competing, but also get people to understand and simplify those weightlifting movements. Hope you've enjoyed. See you on another one.